There's a moment that haunts every human life. You stand at the crossroads, paralyzed not by the lack of options, but by their abundance. The job offer that could change everything, but means leaving behind what you know. The relationship that feels safe, but not alive. The dream that whispers your name, but demands you risk everything you've built. And in that moment of frozen terror, you realize something profound. The fear isn't really about making the wrong choice. It's about discovering who you really are when the comfortable illusions fall away. If you've ever felt trapped between what you should do and what your soul is calling you toward, this video will change how you see every decision for the rest of your life. Hit subscribe because we're about to explore truths that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Welcome back to The Inner Light. I'm here to walk with you through one of the most fundamental human struggles, the art of making decisions that align with who you're becoming, not just who you've been. Today, we're diving deep into why good people make terrible choices, why smart people get paralyzed by simple decisions, and how the greatest thinkers in history learned to navigate the maze of human choice. We'll explore insights from Carl Jung's understanding of the psyche, Dostoyevsky's exploration of human freedom, Buddhist teachings on attachment and clarity, Stoic wisdom on what we can and cannot control, and Kierkegaard's profound insights into authentic choice. This isn't just about decision-making techniques. This is about understanding the hidden forces that drive your choices and learning to make decisions from your deepest truth rather than your deepest fears. The path ahead will challenge everything you think you know about choice, freedom, and the courage to live authentically. But first, we need to understand why making decisions feels so impossibly difficult in the first place. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Indecision. Why we freeze when it matters most. Carl Jung understood something most people never realize. Our inability to make decisions isn't really about the external choices at all. It's about the internal war between different parts of ourselves that we've never learned to integrate. When you stand frozen before an important decision, you're not just weighing options. You're confronting the shadow aspects of your personality that you've spent years avoiding. Think about the last time you were truly stuck on a major decision. Notice how your mind didn't just analyze pros and cons. It spiraled into anxiety, created elaborate worst-case scenarios, and somehow turned a single choice into a referendum on your entire worth as a human being. This is your psyche's way of protecting you from confronting uncomfortable truths about what you actually want versus what you think you should want. Jung called this the problem of opposites. Every significant decision forces us to acknowledge that we contain contradictory desires, values, and fears. The part of you that craves security wars with the part that hungers for growth. The aspect that wants to please others conflicts with the voice that demands authentic self-expression. Most people never make peace with these internal contradictions, so they remain perpetually paralyzed, waiting for a perfect choice that will somehow satisfy all parts of themselves simultaneously. But here's what Jung discovered through decades of working with patients. The goal isn't to eliminate these contradictions, it's to develop what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in creative tension until a third way emerges. This isn't compromise, which weakens both sides. This is synthesis, which creates something entirely new. Consider Sarah, a successful lawyer who spent 2 years agonizing over whether to leave her firm to start a non-profit. On the surface, it seemed like a simple choice between security and purpose, but Jung would have recognized this as a deeper struggle between her persona, the successful professional she'd constructed to gain approval, and her authentic self, which was dying in the fluorescent-lit conference rooms of corporate law. Her paralysis wasn't about career planning. It was about the terror of discovering who she really was beneath the armor of achievement. The shadow of indecision reveals itself in how we make even small choices. Do you find yourself endlessly researching restaurants before choosing where to eat? Do you create elaborate spreadsheets for decisions that could be made intuitively? Do you ask everyone for advice, but somehow never feel satisfied with their answers? These behaviors aren't about being thorough. They're about avoiding the fundamental responsibility of choice, which is the responsibility of becoming who you're meant to be. Here's the uncomfortable truth Jung would want you to face. Every time you postpone a decision, you're making a choice. You're choosing to remain who you've always been instead of risking who you might become. You're choosing the familiar suffering of indecision over the unknown territory of growth. And most painfully, you're choosing to let fear make your decisions for you, which means you're not really living your life at all. Chapter 2. The Burden of Freedom. Dostoyevsky's insight into authentic choice. Fyodor Dostoyevsky understood something about human freedom that most people find almost unbearable to contemplate. We are condemned to be free, and this freedom is simultaneously our greatest gift and our heaviest burden. In his novel, Notes from Underground, he explored why human beings often make choices that seem completely irrational, even self-destructive, simply to assert their freedom to choose. The underground man makes terrible decisions not because he doesn't know better, but because knowing better would mean surrendering his autonomy to logic, society, or even his own best interests. Dostoyevsky saw this as fundamentally human. We would rather make free bad choices than be forced into good ones. This insight reveals why so many people remain stuck in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, or patterns that clearly don't serve them. Sometimes staying stuck is the only way they can feel free. But Dostoyevsky wasn't celebrating irrationality. He was pointing toward a deeper truth about authentic choice. Most of what we call decision-making isn't really choosing at all. It's calculating, optimizing, or conforming to external expectations. Real choice, authentic choice, requires us to confront the terrifying reality that we are ultimately responsible for who we become, regardless of our circumstances, our past, or what others expect from us. Consider the character of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. His terrible crime isn't really about money, or even about testing his theory of extraordinary men. It's about the desperate attempt to prove to himself that he has the freedom to step outside moral boundaries, to choose his own values, rather than accept the ones handed to him by society. The tragedy isn't that he makes the wrong choice, but that he discovers freedom without wisdom leads to destruction, both of others and of himself. This connects to why so many people find themselves paralyzed when facing decisions that could change their lives. Deep down, they understand that choosing means taking full responsibility for the consequences. It means acknowledging that they are the author of their own story, not just a character in someone else's drama. This level of responsibility can feel crushing, especially for people who have spent years believing that their happiness depends on external circumstances or other people's approval. Dostoyevsky would say that our culture's obsession with decision-making frameworks, optimization strategies, and data-driven choices is often just elaborate avoidance of this fundamental responsibility. We want someone or something else to tell us what to choose so we don't have to face the weight of authentic freedom. We ask our friends what they would do. We research what successful people recommend. We analyze every possible outcome. But we rarely ask the most important question: what does this choice reveal about who I am and who I'm becoming? The path through this burden isn't to avoid it, but to embrace it with what Dostoyevsky called conscious suffering. This means accepting that every meaningful choice involves loss, uncertainty, and the possibility of regret. It means understanding that the goal isn't to make perfect choices, but to make choices that are authentically yours, even when they're difficult or misunderstood by others. Think about a decision you've been avoiding. Now ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? Is it making the wrong choice? Or is it taking full responsibility for making any choice at all? Is it the consequences of the decision, or the discovery of who I am when I stop hiding behind indecision? Dostoyevsky would suggest that until you're willing to face these questions honestly, you're not really free to choose anything meaningful at all. Chapter 3, The Middle Way. Buddhist Wisdom on Attachment and Clear Seeing. Buddhism offers perhaps the most profound insight into why we struggle with decisions. Most of our choosing is contaminated by attachment, aversion, and delusion. We don't see situations clearly because we're looking through the lens of what we want, what we fear, and what we think we know. The Buddha taught that right decision-making begins not with analyzing options, but with purifying perception. Consider how most people approach significant choices. They create mental lists of pros and cons, but each item on these lists is colored by emotional attachment. The pro of taking a new job might really be attachment to status, security, or the approval of parents. The con might be aversion to change, fear of failure, or clinging to a familiar identity. None of this is actual seeing. It's all projection based on past conditioning and future fantasies. The Buddhist approach begins with what's called bare attention, the ability to observe a situation without immediately layering it with judgments, preferences, or stories about what it means. This requires developing what Thich Nhat Hanh called the miracle of mindfulness, the capacity to be fully present with what is, rather than lost in mental elaborations about what should be or could be. Let me share how this works in practice. Maya had been offered a promotion that would require relocating to another city. For months, she tortured herself with analysis. She made charts comparing cost of living, researched schools for her children, interviewed people who had made similar moves. But all of this activity was just a sophisticated form of suffering because she was trying to make the decision from a place of attachment and fear. When she finally learned to approach the choice with Buddhist principles, everything changed. She began by sitting quietly and simply observing her reactions to the idea of moving without trying to solve anything. She noticed the excitement that arose when she imagined new challenges, and she noticed it without immediately deciding that meant she should go. She observed the fear about leaving her support system, and she observed it without concluding she should stay. For the first time, she was actually present with the choice, rather than lost in her mental commentary about it. Buddhism teaches that this kind of clear seeing reveals something profound. Most of what we think are external decisions are actually internal transformations waiting to happen. The choice isn't really between staying or going, taking the job or declining it, ending the relationship or working on it. The choice is between remaining unconscious or becoming awake, between acting from reactivity or responding from wisdom. The Buddha identified 3 root causes of suffering that contaminate all our choosing: greed, the attachment to getting what we want; hatred, the aversion to experiencing what we don't want; and delusion, the inability to see things as they actually are. Every difficult decision becomes clear when we learn to recognize these 3 poisons in our own thinking process. Greed shows up as the desperate need for the choice to bring us happiness, security, or fulfillment. We can't choose clearly because we're too attached to a specific outcome. Hatred appears as the compulsive need to avoid discomfort, uncertainty, or loss. We reject options, not because they're wrong, but because they involve facing something we don't want to feel. Delusion manifests as the belief that there's a perfect choice that will solve all our problems, or that we can control outcomes through enough analysis and planning. The Buddhist practice of non-attachment doesn't mean not caring about the outcome of your decisions. It means caring deeply while holding outcomes lightly. It means choosing from love rather than fear, from clarity rather than confusion, from presence rather than projection, into an imaginary future. This transforms the entire experience of choice. Instead of trying to figure out which option will make you happy, you learn to choose from a place of already being complete. Instead of attempting to avoid all possible suffering, you choose with the understanding that growth often requires moving through difficulty. Instead of seeking the perfect decision, you make the choice that serves the highest good you can perceive in this moment, knowing that you'll have the wisdom to navigate whatever unfolds. The deepest Buddhist insight about decision-making is this: when you're truly present, when you're not grasping or pushing away, when you're seeing clearly rather than through the filter of old conditioning, the right choice often becomes obvious. Not because it's the easiest or most comfortable, but because it's aligned with the deepest truth you can access in that moment. Chapter 4. The Discipline of Focus, Stoic Principles for Decisive Action. The ancient Stoics understood something about decision-making that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. Most of our decision paralysis comes from trying to control things that are fundamentally outside our control. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca taught that clarity comes not from analyzing every possible outcome, but from focusing intensely on the only thing we can actually control: our own responses, choices, and character development. Epictetus, who knew something about constraint, having spent years as a slave, taught the fundamental distinction that underlies all Stoic wisdom. Some things are within our power, while others are not. This isn't just philosophy. It's the most practical decision-making tool ever developed. Every time you feel paralyzed by a choice, ask yourself, what part of this situation is actually within my control, and what am I trying to control that isn't? Consider James, an entrepreneur who spent months agonizing over whether to launch his new product. He researched market conditions, analyzed competitor strategies, conducted focus groups, and created elaborate financial projections. But all of this analysis was focused on trying to control variables that were fundamentally outside his influence: how customers would respond, what competitors would do, how economic conditions might change. The Stoics would recognize this as a form of mental torture disguised as prudent planning. Marcus Aurelius would have advised James to focus on what was actually within his control: the quality of his preparation, the integrity of his effort, the wisdom of his research, and his response to whatever outcome emerged. This shift in focus doesn't guarantee success, but it eliminates the paralysis that comes from trying to control an uncontrollable future. The Stoic approach to decision-making begins with what Seneca called negative visualization, the practice of mentally rehearsing potential losses or failures, not to become pessimistic, but to build emotional resilience and clarity about what really matters. When you can honestly face the worst-case scenario of any decision and discover that you could handle it with dignity and wisdom, the choice often becomes much simpler. This connects to another core Stoic principle: decisions should be made based on virtue rather than outcomes. Instead of asking, what choice will make me happy, wealthy, or successful, the Stoic asks, what choice will allow me to live with courage, justice, wisdom, and self-discipline? This radically simplifies complex decisions because it provides a clear hierarchy of values that doesn't depend on predicting an unpredictable future. Seneca, one of Rome's richest guys, really got the tricky nature of outcome-based thinking. He believed that when we make choices based on outside results, we end up tied to things we can't control. But when we focus on building our character and sticking to our values, we stay free no matter what happens. That's why Stoics could stay calm whether they got a promotion or a demotion, were praised or criticized, or had money or not. The Stoic practice of the view from above provides another powerful tool for decision-making. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself to imagine how his current concerns would appear from the perspective of vast time and space. Will this decision matter in 10 years? How would it look to someone observing from a great height? This practice doesn't minimize the importance of our choices, but it helps distinguish between decisions that deserve significant energy and those that we've inflated with unnecessary drama. Perhaps most importantly, the Stoics understood that indecision is itself a decision. Epictetus taught that every moment we spend avoiding a choice is a moment we're choosing to remain stuck in uncertainty rather than moving forward with wisdom and courage. The Stoic doesn't wait for perfect information or guaranteed outcomes. They gather what knowledge they can, consult their deepest values, and then act with full commitment while remaining unattached to results. This creates what the Stoics called the discipline of action, the ability to move decisively in the world while maintaining inner tranquility. You make choices based on your best understanding of virtue and wisdom in the present moment, knowing that you cannot control how these choices will unfold, but trusting that you have the character and resilience to respond wisely to whatever emerges. The ultimate Stoic insight about decision-making is this: when you stop trying to control outcomes and focus entirely on making choices that align with your deepest values and highest character, you discover a kind of freedom that external circumstances cannot touch. Your decisions become expressions of who you are, rather than desperate attempts to manipulate who you might become. Chapter 5. The Leap of Faith. Kierkegaard's understanding of authentic choice. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, often called the father of existentialism, understood something about decision-making that cuts to the very heart of human existence. The most important choices in life cannot be made through rational analysis alone. They require what he called the leap of faith, a movement beyond the safety of objective reasoning into the realm of subjective truth and passionate commitment. Kierkegaard distinguished between 3 stages of human existence, each with its own approach to choice. The aesthetic stage is where most people live, making decisions based on immediate pleasure, avoiding boredom, and seeking novelty. The ethical stage involves choosing based on universal moral principles and social obligations. But the highest stage, the religious stage, requires making choices that transcend both personal desire and social convention. Choices that can only be made through passionate, subjective commitment to what you know to be true in the depths of your being. This isn't about religious belief in a conventional sense. Kierkegaard was pointing toward the reality that our most profound choices, who to love, what to dedicate our lives to, how to respond to suffering, what meaning to create from our existence, cannot be made through spreadsheets, advice from others, or even careful moral reasoning. These choices require what he called subjectivity, the willingness to stake your entire existence on something that cannot be proven or guaranteed. Consider Maria, who had spent 3 years in graduate school studying environmental science, but felt increasingly disconnected from academic life. Every rational analysis suggested she should complete her degree. She was close to finishing, had invested significant time and money, and faced a competitive job market. But something deeper was calling her toward working directly with communities affected by environmental degradation, even though this path offered no clear career trajectory or financial security. Kierkegaard would recognize Maria's struggle as the conflict between what he called the crowd and the individual. The crowd represents all the external voices telling us what we should choose: societal expectations, family pressure, economic logic, peer comparisons. The individual represents the unique calling that emerges from our deepest authentic self, the voice that often asks us to choose something that makes no sense to others. The anxiety Maria felt wasn't really about making the wrong career choice. It was what Kierkegaard called the anxiety of freedom, the dizzying recognition that we are ultimately responsible for creating meaning and direction in our lives through our choices. This anxiety cannot be resolved through more information or better analysis. It can only be moved through by making what Kierkegaard called the passionate choice, choosing with your whole being based on your deepest sense of truth, even when that truth cannot be objectively validated. Kierkegaard understood that this kind of choosing requires enormous courage, because it means taking full responsibility for who you become. When you choose based on external authorities, what your parents want, what society rewards, what seems most logical, you can always blame those authorities if things don't work out. But when you choose from your authentic self, you must own the consequences completely. This is terrifying, but it's also the only path to what Kierkegaard called authentic existence. He also recognized that authentic choices often appear foolish or incomprehensible to others. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac made no sense ethically or rationally, but it represented the highest form of faith, the willingness to act on a truth that transcends conventional understanding. Every person faces their own version of this choice, moments when they must decide whether to follow the path that makes sense to everyone else or the path that makes sense to their deepest self. The paralysis that many people experience when facing important decisions often stems from trying to make these leaps of faith through rational analysis. Kierkegaard would say, "This is impossible. You cannot think your way into passionate commitment. You cannot analyze your way into authentic choice. At some point, you must simply leap, trusting that your capacity to create meaning and navigate uncertainty is stronger than your need for guaranteed outcomes." This doesn't mean making impulsive or reckless decisions. Kierkegaard emphasized the importance of what he called repetition, the ongoing choice to recommit to your authentic path, even when it becomes difficult or when you begin to doubt. The leap of faith isn't a one-time decision, but a continuous choosing, a daily decision to trust your deepest knowing, even when external circumstances would suggest you made the wrong choice. The profound insight Kierkegaard offers for decision-making is this: the decisions that matter most are not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be lived. They require not just your mind, but your entire being, your emotions, your intuition, your willingness to risk being wrong in service of being authentic. When you learn to make choices from this place of integrated wholeness, you discover that the anxiety of decision-making transforms into the exhilaration of creative living. Conclusion. The art of choosing who you become. We began this journey exploring why making decisions feels so impossibly difficult, and we've discovered something profound. The struggle with choice is never really about the external options at all. It's about the internal transformation that authentic choosing demands. Every meaningful decision is an invitation to become more fully yourself, and that invitation can feel both thrilling and terrifying. Jung showed us that our paralysis comes from the unintegrated parts of our psyche that war with each other when we try to choose. Dostoyevsky revealed that true freedom requires taking full responsibility for who we become, regardless of our circumstances. Buddhism taught us that clear seeing, rather than attachment to outcomes, is the foundation of wise choosing. The Stoics demonstrated that focusing on what we can control eliminates most decision-making anxiety, and Kierkegaard illuminated that our most important choices require leaps of faith that transcend rational analysis. But perhaps the deepest insight from this exploration is this: you are not trying to make the right choices. You are trying to make choices rightly. The difference is everything. Making the right choice assumes there's some external standard of correctness that you need to discover and conform to. Making choices rightly means choosing from your most integrated, authentic, and conscious self, regardless of whether others understand or approve. This transforms everything about how you approach decisions. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" you begin asking, "Who am I becoming through this choice?" Instead of trying to control outcomes, you focus on making choices that align with your deepest values and truest self. Instead of seeking certainty, you develop the courage to choose authentically, even in the face of uncertainty. The art of decision-making is ultimately the art of self-creation. Every choice you make is a brushstroke on the canvas of who you're becoming. Some brushstrokes will be bold and clear, others will be tentative or need to be painted over. But each one contributes to the unique masterpiece of your authentic existence. The next time you find yourself frozen between options, remember this: the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty or guarantee the perfect outcome. The goal is to choose from the fullest, most integrated version of yourself that you can access in this moment. Trust that you have the wisdom to navigate whatever unfolds, the resilience to handle whatever consequences arise, and the creativity to find meaning and growth in any outcome. If this exploration has resonated with something deep inside you, I invite you to share it with someone who might be struggling with their own difficult choice. Leave a comment about a decision that transformed you, not because you made the perfect choice, but because you made it authentically, and subscribe to continue walking together into the deepest questions of what it means to live a fully conscious, courageously chosen life. The path of authentic choosing is not easy, but it is the path of freedom, growth, and the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing you are living your own life rather than the life others expect you to live. The choice, as always, is yours.